HOA told me to sell my house, but what they didn't know is that I'm the real estate commissioner. That line wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war disguised as neighborly order. And the moment it left their lips, I knew my life in this quiet neighborhood would never be the same again. I felt the words slam into me like a judge's gavel. Sell my house? My house? The walls I painted, the floors I repaired with my own hands, the place where my late nights turned into mornings with nothing but a coffee cup and the hum of silence to keep me company? They weren't asking me to move. They were demanding I surrender the very ground I had fought my whole life to stand on. When it happened, I remember standing at my doorway, with the sun going down behind me, a faint hum from sprinklers across the street, and children laughing in a distant yard. It was the kind of suburban evening people dream about. But in that moment, the air tasted bitter. Sweet grass in dusk should have felt comforting. Instead, every shadow stretched like an accusation. They thought I was just another homeowner. Another name on their list. Another one in their file is a signature. They believed they could intimidate me with papers, notices in large print, fine threats and whispers from behind closed blinds. But I am not just another resident. I am the one who knows every statute they twist, every loophole they try to exploit, every false threat they dare to send in ink, because I am the commissioner for real estate. The very laws they pretend to wield, I wrote them, I enforced them, I lived them. Yet here I was, being told to abandon my home as if I were powerless. The way fear works is strange. You can know the law better than anyone. You can have every fact and every weapon of knowledge on your side, and still your heart pounds when they corner you. When they tell you that you don't belong here, your hands still shake, because the fear of being outnumbered regardless of who you are is more important than facts. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the blinds half closed, the silence broken only by the tick of the clock and the occasional car rolling past. I thought about what they had said. I thought about the arrogance behind it, the confidence in their voices when they believed I would fold. But mostly I thought about the people watching, neighbors peeking through curtains, families who had seen what the HOA could do and decided it was easier to bow their heads. People who used to wave at me from across the street now avoid my gaze out of concern that my fight might one day become theirs. And that's when I made my decision. This didn't just concern me. This wasn't just about a house. This represented nearly every homeowner who had ever been told they had no power, every family who had been fined into silence, every voice that had been smothered by the weight of authority disguised as community care. I was going to fight. Not just for my home, but for the principle that no one, not even an HOA, has the right to dictate where you belong. So when they told me to sell, they didn't just issue an order. They set fire to it, and they had no idea how dangerous that fire could become when it burned in the hands of the one man who understood their game better than anyone else. The first letter arrived folded too neatly, as if its edges had been sharpened to cut. It slid under my door one morning, carried by the footsteps of someone who didn't want to be seen. No knock, no greeting, just paper left like a threat. I picked it up already knowing what it was. The seal of the HOA glared at me from the top like a brand of ownership. The words were clinical, stripped of warmth, but I could feel the smugness between every line. Violation notice, failure to comply, immediate action required. They spoke of my fence, of its color being out of harmony with the neighborhood. My fence, white as bone, straight as a soldier, cleaner than half the fences on the street, yet mine, somehow, was unacceptable. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, not from weakness but from fury. I had seen this before, over and over in case files, in complaints from homeowners who had come to me begging for help. I was aware of the strategy. Start slowly, lower confidence, and apply more pressure until the target gives in or breaks. But this was not a case file. My life was like this. My home. A week later, I received the second letter. Another alert. Another failure. This time it was my garden. They said it was too wild, too chaotic. Never mind that the roses bloomed like fire in the evening sun, or that the soil carried years of my sweat. Beauty was only what they approved of for them. Then came the fines. Not large at first. 100 here, 200 there. Enough to sting, but not enough to justify a war in most people's eyes. Enough to make the average homeowner think, maybe it's not worth the fight. That's how they win, by bleeding you slowly. The neighbors started changing too. The couple across the street who once waved at me while walking their dog now avoided eye contact. Fresh peaches used to be delivered by a retired veteran who left them at someone else's door. Smiles faded. The conversation was over. One by one, the friendly faces became silent walls. And silence is its own kind of violence. You begin to wonder if everyone is against you. You begin to wonder if your own block, your own street, has turned into a jury waiting for your conviction. I remember one night stepping outside just to breathe. The air was cool, the stars scattered like a million tiny witnesses, and yet I felt alone. Porch lights flicked off as I walked past. Blinds closed as if I carried a plague. That's when it hit me. They weren't just isolating me. They were trying to erase me. But here's the mistake they made. They thought silence would break me. They thought fines would scare me. They thought letters, threats, and whispers would be enough, but I don't break. Every notice they sent became fuel. Every fine they imposed became a reminder. Every whisper in the dark became a challenge. Because while they were playing their game with papers and signatures, they had forgotten one thing. I know the rules better than they do, and I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle their entire illusion of power, piece by piece, line by line, law by law. The letter that broke the silence didn't come folded. It came stamped, sealed, and shoved into my mailbox with the weight of finality. I pulled it out that morning, the sky still painted with streaks of gray, dew clinging to the grass like the world itself was holding its breath. I knew before I even opened it that this one would be different. And it was. Failure to comply with association standards will result in forced action. You are hereby advised to list and sell your property within 90 days to avoid further penalties. Sell my property. 90 days. The words glared at me from the page, cold and merciless, as if they weren't talking about a home but a possession to be shuffled on a chessboard. I remember my hands tightening on that paper until the edges crumpled. My breath came sharp, heavy. For a moment the world around me blurred. The trees, the houses, the faint sound of a lawnmower in the distance. All I could see were those words. Sell your property. This wasn't about compliance anymore. This wasn't about fences or gardens or harmony. This was about eviction through intimidation. They weren't fining me into obedience. They were trying to erase me. That night was the longest of my life. I sat in my kitchen, the letter spread out on the table like a wound that refused to close. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, and it mocked me with its constancy. Everything else felt unstable. My home, my neighbors, even my sense of belonging. I thought about walking away, about packing boxes, stacking them neatly, and vanishing from this street without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But then I thought about what this house meant. Every nail I hammered into its frame, every wall I painted, every memory etched into its rooms. I thought about the first night I unlocked the door, the echo of my footsteps through empty halls, the quiet promise I made to myself, this is mine, this is where I belong. And now they wanted to strip it from me, not because I had done anything wrong, but because they thought they could. Fear and fury fought inside me that night, circling like predators. But when the dawn came, when the first streaks of sunlight spilled across the table and touched that letter, I knew something had shifted. They had pushed me to the edge. They had handed me their final card. And now it was my turn. They thought they were dealing with a frightened homeowner. They thought I was just another signature they could push off the board. But I am the real estate commissioner. I don't just know the law. I am the law they're pretending to wield. And they had just made the gravest mistake of all. They forced me to show them who I really am. The meeting was held in a room that smelled of dust and stale coffee. A rented hall, lined with folding chairs. The kind of place where people gather to feel important. I walked in with their letter still folded in my pocket, its words etched into my skin like a scar. They sat at the front behind a long plastic table, 5 of them in matching expressions of smug authority. Clipboards, binders, and glasses of lukewarm water laid out like weapons. They didn't look at me as a neighbor. They looked at me as prey. The chairwoman cleared her throat, eyes sharp behind polished frames. Mr. Daniels, we've given you ample opportunity to comply. You've refused. At this point, the only option left is for you to sell your home. The association has voted unanimously. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. The others nodded, hands folded, lips pursed. To them, this was routine. Another victory. Another homeowner swallowed whole. I let the silence stretch, let their certainty hang heavy in the air. Then I leaned forward, my hands resting flat on the table. Do you know who I am? The words didn't come out loud, but they cut through the room like glass. They exchanged glances, brows furrowed, confused by the question. I pulled the letter from my pocket, unfolded it, and laid it flat on the table between us. You've accused me. You've threatened me. You've demanded I sell my home. But before you go any further, you should understand something. My eyes met each of theirs, one by one, until the room felt smaller, tighter. I am not just a homeowner. I am the real estate commissioner. The laws you claim to enforce, I oversee them. The regulations you twist into weapons, I write them. And the authority you think you hold over me, I tap the letter with my finger. It doesn't exist. For the first time, their expressions faltered. The chairwoman's lips parted, searching for words that didn't come. A man at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The certainty they carried in their shoulders began to slip, replaced by something else, fear. I didn't raise my voice. You've been bullying homeowners with false notices. You've been issuing fines outside your authority. And now you've tried to intimidate the one person who knows exactly how far your reach actually goes. I leaned back, letting the silence do the rest. It pressed on them, suffocating, undeniable. For the first time since this battle began, they weren't in control. I was. And in that moment I realized something. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had exposed themselves. Their power wasn't real. It was built on fear, on silence, on the hope that no one would ever call their bluff. But I wasn't silent. I wasn't afraid. And I wasn't backing down. When I finally stood, the chair legs scraped across the floor like a verdict. I folded the letter, slid it back into my pocket, and looked them in the eye. You told me to sell my house. I suggest you remember whose law you're standing on before you try that again. And then I walked out. That was the moment everything changed. When I walked out of that meeting, I wasn't just leaving a room. I was stepping onto a battlefield. The HOA thought their power was absolute. They relied on letters, threats, and silence to keep people in line. But power is only real if it goes unchallenged. And now, for the first time, someone was challenging it. The next morning, I began my counterattack. I sat at my desk. Stacks of files spread around me like an arsenal. Every regulation, every statute, every clause of property law I had ever written or enforced was now a weapon at my disposal. The sunlight streamed across the room, highlighting the pages as if they were maps to freedom. I drafted letters, not filled with threats, not dripping with arrogance, but with the cold, unshakable weight of truth. I cited state codes they had ignored, federal protections they had trampled over, and legal precedents they were pretending didn't exist. Each line I wrote wasn't just a response, it was a strike. I sent copies to the board, I sent copies to the city, I sent copies to the agencies that had the authority to look deeper than their smug confidence would allow. Within days, their silence began to crack. The first crack came when I saw one of the board members in town. He was usually the kind of man who walked with a straight back, chin high, a permanent smirk tugging at his mouth. But that day, he couldn't look me in the eye. His shoulders sagged, his steps quickened, as though the very ground beneath him had turned against him. The second crack came in the form of whispers. Neighbors who had once avoided me began leaving notes in my mailbox. Anonymous at first, scribbled in shaky handwriting. They find me too. They threatened to take my shed. I didn't fight because I was afraid. It turned out I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. I had only been made to feel that way. That's when I realized the HOA wasn't just trying to control me. They were trying to control everyone, and fear was their sharpest tool. But fear only works when it stays in the shadows. So I dragged it into the light. I called for a neighborhood meeting. Not theirs, not in their dusty rented hall, but on my own lawn, under the wide open sky where no walls could contain the truth. Word spread fast. Some came cautiously, arms crossed, waiting to see what would happen. Others came with relief in their eyes, finally seeing someone bold enough to stand where they had once felt too small. I told them everything. I held up the notices, the fines, the ultimatum. I read aloud the laws they had twisted, the limits they had ignored. I laid bare the truth they had hoped would stay buried. And as I spoke, I saw the fear in my neighbors' faces begin to shift, first to anger, then to courage. Because courage, like fear, is contagious. That night, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was leading something bigger. The HOA had tried to silence one man, and instead they had awakened an entire street. And this was only the beginning. The board didn't invite me back. They summoned me. A letter slipped into my mailbox again, stamped heavier than before, as though the ink itself had been pressed with anger. Final hearing, mandatory attendance. They thought the word mandatory still carried weight. They thought I would arrive bowed, head lowered, ready to take their punishment. But I didn't walk into that room alone. When I opened the door to that rented hall again, the air was different. Not stale, not stagnant, alive. Behind me came neighbors, dozens of them, faces once hidden now uncovered. steps once hesitant, now firm. They filled the chairs, the aisles, the very edges of the room. The board members sat stiff at their table, papers stacked high, glares sharp, but for the first time, they weren't staring down one man. They were staring down a community. The chairwoman's voice cracked slightly when she spoke. "Mr. Daniels, this hearing is to address your repeated failures to comply." I raised a hand, cutting her off. My voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "No, this hearing is to address yours." Gasps rippled through the room. My neighbors leaned forward, the air tightening as though everyone was breathing the same single breath. I stepped closer to the table, each word measured like a strike of a hammer. "You've issued fines without legal basis. You've ordered changes outside your authority. You've demanded the sale of property without cause, and you've built your power not on law but on fear." I pulled a folder from under my arm and laid it flat on the table. Inside was every letter they had sent me, every violation notice, every so-called penalty, each one marked with the exact code or statute they had ignored. I tapped the folder once. The board shifted uneasily. The chairwoman's jaw clenched, her hands tightening around her pen. "You don't have the authority to—" I leaned forward, voice sharp enough to cut her words in half. "I am the authority." The room went silent. It wasn't anger in my voice, it was truth, cold and undeniable. And truth, when spoken without hesitation, leaves no room for argument. Behind me, my neighbors began to murmur. Then louder, a voice rang out. "We've had enough." Another, "You fined me for my shutters." Another, "You told me to tear down my shed." The whispers turned to a chorus. The room shook not from my words alone, but from the collective weight of voices that had been silenced for too long. The board looked cornered, their control unraveling in real time. Papers shuffled, faces paled, and for the first time I saw it, the collapse of their illusion. I straightened, folding my arms across my chest. "You told me to sell my house. You told me I didn't belong here. But this isn't just my home. It's our home, and tonight we're taking it back." The applause started slow, then grew, rising like thunder rolling through the walls. Neighbors stood, voices joined, and in that sound was the final blow, the one no board, no letter, no threat could withstand. The HOA had ruled through silence, but silence was broken now, and once it's broken, it can never return. When the meeting ended, there was no gavel, no official vote, no neat conclusion written on paper. There didn't need to be. The verdict had already been delivered, not by the board, but by the people they had tried to control. The board members slipped out one by one, their shoulders heavy, their papers clutched tight like shields that no longer worked. The chairwoman avoided my eyes, her once unshakable posture broken. For all their talk of order and authority, they left in silence, stripped of the power they had worn like a crown. But the people stayed. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now stood on my lawn, voices rising not in whispers but in conversation, in laughter, in relief. The weight that had hung over our block had lifted. The air felt lighter, freer, as if even the wind had been waiting for this moment. For me, it was more than victory. It was vindication. I thought back to the night I almost gave in. The night I sat in the kitchen with that letter spread across the table like a death sentence. I thought about the fear that pressed down on me, about the temptation to walk away, about how close I had come to surrendering the home I had built with my own hands. And I thought about the fire that kept me here. Because in the end, this fight was never just about a house. It was about the principle that no one has the right to tell you where you belong. It was about standing your ground, not just for yourself, but for everyone too afraid to do it alone. That's what power really is. Not fines, not notices, not titles. Power is people who refuse to be silenced. Power is truth spoken louder than fear. As the crowd began to thin and the night grew quiet again, I stood in the doorway of my home, my house. The walls glowed faintly in the porch light, steady and unshaken, just as they had been from the very beginning. And I knew, in that moment, that no letter, no board, no neighbor with a clipboard could ever take it from me. So let me say this, not just as a homeowner, not just as a commissioner, but as someone who has lived through it. If you are being bullied, if you are being silenced, if you are being told you don't belong, stand your ground. You don't need a title to fight back. You don't need permission to keep what's yours. All you need is the courage to say no more. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and freedom is the decision to stop being afraid. And once you make that choice, nothing, no HOA, no board, no false authority can ever move you again. This is my home, this is my ground, and I am never leaving.